like to call the March 9th, 2023 Planning and Zoning Commission to order. Would everyone please rise and follow me in the Pledge of Allegiance? Carson, you going to do the roll?
Sorry, that's me.
All right.
Chairman Muther,
Here.
Vice Chair Schneck,
Here.
Mr. Gutnick,
Here.
Mr. Louie,
Present.
Ms. Nixon. Present. Mr. Panic, and Mr. Utley.
Here. All right, got a full house. Thank you all for being here. Have you all looked at the minutes from February 9th and any additions, changes?
I sent 2 minor edits to the staff.
Okay. You got those? All right, very good. I was not here. Thank you all for covering for me. I guess I'd look for a first and a second.
Make a motion to approve the minutes as submitted with corrections.
Second.
It's all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. I have abstained since I was not here. Okay, would anyone in the audience tonight or staff that intend to speak this evening, would you please stand and take the oath to tell the truth, please?
Yes.
Great, thank you. All right, are there any changes to the agenda tonight?
There are no changes to this evening.
All right, thank you. We'll move on to case number 1, PZ-23-2, Aquarium Adventures, located at 3649 Fishinger Boulevard, for review and approval of a sign variance under the provisions of Hilliard Code Section 1129.03 to increase the maximum area of window signage. Staff?
Good evening. This applicant is requesting an excess of the 10% window coverage. In March of 2020, City Manager Crandall enacted a temporary sign modification allowing businesses to have additional window signage as well as temporary signage. That modification was lifted in November of 2022, and code enforcement inspected businesses citywide to ensure they were in code compliance. It was determined that this applicant was in excess of the 10% window allowance. The applicant did apply to the Public Arts Commission requesting that the signage be considered as a mural. However, since the design is on the window, it was considered a window sign. So the applicant is now requesting the Planning and Zoning Commission consider this variance for excess window signage. This is the site location at 3649 Fishinger Boulevard. This is the site detail, and the circle shows the location in that shopping center. This is just another view from the Fishinger Road entrance. And this is the current window display that they have and that they are requesting to keep. It's approximately 52% of the window coverage. This is a detail up close of that signage. And staff is recommending disapproval, considering that the window signage is a significant departure from the 10% coverage, that there can be beneficial use of the property without the proposed variance, and that the proposal is not consistent with the spirit and intent of the graphics and sign code.
Any questions for staff? Yes, sir.
I guess I don't
Well,
understand.
if they weren't windows and they were just put on the wall, it would probably meet the requirements of the, well, it would probably be considered a sign. It would have to meet the requirements of the. It wouldn't. So if this were just on the wall, it would probably exceed the maximum signage area for that, but there would be opportunities to come here to get a variance for that, for the colors, for the size. And if it was on a wall, maybe it would be more apt to apply for a mural. But I mean, that's, since it's on the windows, it's window signage, and it doesn't meet the requirements for a mural. So as it is included in the staff report, we talked to the applicant about that, and that, the Public Arts Commission found that it was not a mural based on that. So it came back here. This is the avenue to, if they want to keep it like it is, this would be the. I don't know how long it's been there, but it's been there for some time, yeah.
Sure, Bill.
Sorry, excuse me, commission members. If you're going to speak, can you please turn on your microphone? Thank you.
Thank you. I assume that this signage, it appeared to be opaque to me. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, so you cannot see, if you're inside the building, you can't see through it. And if you're outside the building, you can't see in.
Correct.
Okay. 'Cause I remember there was concerns from our safety forces about excess signage. One of the reasons we have this in the code is for safety reasons, that the police, safety forces need to be able to see into the businesses just in their routine patrols. That's just one aspect of that, though. Thank you.
For staff, for John, is this a plastic or some type of polyurethane screen, mylar screen that's applied to the window that can also be taken off the windows?
That would probably be a question for the applicant, but I believe that sections of it can be removed, yes.
Okay, that's all I had.
Okay. Any other questions? Is the applicant here this evening? Would you please approach the stand, please, and state your name?
Hello, I'm Steve Orr with Aquarium Adventure.
Do you have anything to add, or?
Yeah, it is opaque, and the reason we put it up, we never considered it signage. It was not a marketing intention. It was put up intentionally because it's opaque and because of those two sides of the store. You'd be looking through and seeing the side of a freezer on one side and the side of racking on the other side. So it just looked cluttered. It was purely an aesthetic choice to hide what looked like clutter from the front of the store. It is vinyl. It's applied vinyl right to the windows. So it's certainly removable.
Anyone here have questions for the applicant?
Is that applied with a hair dryer?
I'm not, it's like, in fact, we use the same company that wraps our vans, our service vans, so it's.
My concern is the right side and the left side are like 10 feet tall. And when I went by there, not once but twice, I can see through the middle section where it says Aquarium Adventures quite well, but the two high ones, I can't see anything through that. That would be my concern about it, having it staying there and remaining there for a long period of time. I think it does cover up the interior a little too much. It's pretty, but a lot of pretty. That's what I'm concerned about.
Anyone else have anything for the applicant? Yes. How long has it been there?
Since we opened, about 5 years ago, yeah.
And then you're saying there's like cluttery stuff behind it, so if it was ordered to be removed, what would you do?
You would see the ends of retail racking and a freezer on one end, yeah.
Thank you for,
Mr. Chairman?
yes.
Just along with that, you are allowed to put some screening that, like curtains or other things that could mask that wouldn't be considered signage. You know, so to keep the sun from coming in and that kind of thing.
One of the options we looked
So-
at was putting blinds up.
Right, so you can do that.
Which, didn't seem like, this seemed like a better aesthetic choice than just putting blinds or shades up and completely blocking the view.
So
Where
we,
are you going, John?
well, because we've talked to we had talked to the applicant about the possibility of having not as much of this. But so I guess we'd be interested to hear from the commission on if what your thoughts are on what's proposed, or if you don't think that is appropriate, are there ways to make it more appropriate?
John, a few years ago, didn't we have an applicant very similar to this? And they took down their signage, their window film, and they put a curtain or something 3 feet behind that that went up about 9 feet. You recall that? And it was the compromise was, the curtain was also screening, but not on the glass. That makes sense to you?
Yeah, I don't remember. The code considers any graphics within 6 feet of the window to be window signage. So if you're 6 feet 1 inch away, then it's not. So there have been some who've done similar things, moved it back 6 feet, then it's not window signage. So
But would still block the view? I mean, it's okay if it still blocks the view into the,
I'm just
Space?
having rapport with staff. I'm not coming up with any conditions at all.
I'm sorry, I was looking for clarification on what is or is not allowed.
That's all I had.
I guess, John, my thoughts are it's a bit much the way it is right now. That's just my feelings. And if we were to approve something like this, then the next group's going to come in and want to do the same thing. And those are my concerns. How anybody else feels.
That's my impression. I went by there not once but twice and saw the same thing, and it's very beautiful, but there's just too much of it. I'm sorry. Fish, ocean, coral. It's beautiful up close and beautiful in the parking lot, but it's just too gosh darn many of it.
Okay.
I'm concerned about the precedent, as Chairman mentioned, because we've had some similar things in the past, and we usually were able to reach some type of a compromise. This just seems like it's too much. I'm not going to say it's not pretty, but it's the precedent. And how do the next guy comes along and puts up something inside, it's similar, but it's different, maybe not as pretty, whatever, but you gotta, what is percentage of the window coverage, is it 50, 60?
It's approximately 52%.
52%, yeah.
What would you estimate the 10% that would be allowed? Like, when I look at the picture, like, how much of the window is allowable to cover up? What's your guess?
When we did the calculations, 2 full panels from top to bottom, being the top, middle, and bottom panel, would be just a hair over the 10%. So, yeah, so if you took 2 of those panels, top, middle, and bottom, from top to bottom, that would be like 11%. So it's pretty comparable to that.
I'll go back to that. So this area here, these 2 full panels, top to bottom, right, Forrest, is that?
We have an alternate way of getting us the percentage down. I believe we have a slide we could show. So the focal point on the graphic is the school of yellowfish. Obviously, that's what's most visible from any kind of distance. If we were to trim the graphic and remove or black out, I'm hearing now that blacking it out is not, would be the same issue. But if we were to remove that lower part and left the band with the yellow fish, such that the math worked out that it's less of a percentage, is that a viable alternative? Can you see, I don't know if you can tell by that graphic.
I see what you're talking about there. What did, when he presented that to staff, what did staff think of that?
I mean, it gets closer to the requirement. I mean, if you like, we can, I don't know if we have estimates for that area, but we could work with the applicant on getting a definitive area, percentage, and show kind of like this, and bring it back to you if you think that would be easier, or if you want to take a crack at it now, what do you think's better?
I believe that what's shown is about 20%.
Yeah, I believe we estimated it to be about 15 to 20%.
I think a compromise would be nice. I think so too. I guess what I'd like to do, rather than try to pinpoint what that is tonight, if he could work with you over the next month and come back next month with something that you guys feel is appropriate. I'm sure if we're outside that percentage that's required, if we get a little outside of that and it looks nice, I think this group would probably be inclined to go along with it. I'd like to work with him if we could.
Okay, we can do that. It would require you to request a postponement till next month so that we can work with you on that. We can't just do that without your,
Can I request that right now?
absolutely.
Until next month.
And then we can meet and figure out what that would be.
Sounds fair.
So the applicant has requested a postponement until the April 13th meeting. Do we just need a voice vote? A motion? Okay, first of all, I need a motion to,
So moved.
Thank you.
Second the motion, say postpone it.
and all in favor, say aye.
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 All opposed, same sign. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Appreciate your time.
All right, moving on to case 2, PZ-23-5, Upper View Flats Apartments for review and approval of a comprehensive sign plan consisting of primarily identification signs, ground signs, vehicular directional, and additional site amenity signage. Staff?
Thank you very much. We're going to be, the sign, sorry about that. Sounded weird. Okay, so the Upper View Flats Apartments is a comprehensive sign package. Do you know what that sound is?
Can we try, if you're not talking, turn it off and only turn it on when you're actually talking?
Okay, so overhead here, we have a, it's probably that, yeah. Okay, there we go. Overhead here, we have the general site view showing the Upper View Flats Apartments. The site is just northwest of the Riggins Road and Britton Parkway intersection. Here's another view, just a little bit closer up, showing some of that early on construction of this development. The comprehensive sign plan has 6 total directional signs, an entry sign over top of the door to the clubhouse, and then a couple of ground signs. This first sign here, I don't know what's going on with this. Apologize for the technical difficulties. So this first sign here is one of the ground signs. This is the east entrance sign. As you can see, it's about 8 feet tall and somewhere in the neighborhood of about 95 square feet. The illumination details were omitted, so we're not 100% sure what they want to do with that. But they're set back pretty far off the road, so the increase in size is kind of the explanation for that. This is the west sign. The only difference between the east and west ground signs, as you can see, I'll point up there. The address on the eastern sign is included down there for the clubhouse, just because of the proximity to the clubhouse. The west access doesn't actually have any building nearby, so staff felt it was appropriate to have that omitted. Here's just some of the materials and colors that are going to be used for the ground signs. Onto the directional signs, there are 6 of these proposed. They are essentially just showing, the building numbers and identification, as well as some of the amenities on the site. Once again, the illumination wasn't included in this. This next one is the sign above the door to the clubhouse entrance. And once again, the illumination details weren't provided for this either. The last one here is the additional ground sign which the applicant could probably expand upon the request for this, but it's a relatively small sign. I think my notes had it about 14 square feet. Or, pardon, about 9 square feet on this sign and about 3.5 feet tall. And it's kind of set back off the road a little bit, pretty close to the clubhouse entrance. So staff finds that the general sign package meets the spirit and intent of the sign code and the Britain Central PUD text, and staff recommends approval with the conditions shown on the screen. I do want to make note, though, that condition 1 has already been at least partially addressed with the addition of the address on the monument sign of the east. So that part has already been addressed. So that's all.
Any questions for staff?
Just one dumb question. I noticed the people are standing like 4 feet on top of the sign. Is that underground stuff?
Yeah, so the portions, I can go back to those. Yeah, so you can see that that grayish brick portion, all of that is subterranean. So everything shown there on all those signs is actually underground.
Does that work with planting then? Because like the sign goes all the way down to the ground.
I'm not 100% sure how that would affect that, to be truthful, but the applicant did provide a landscape plan. We didn't put that in the presentation, but it met the normal code requirements for landscaping, so.
Okay.
Any other questions of staff? Is the applicant here this evening? Please state your name. And turn your microphone on.
Good evening, Chairman Muther and members of the commission. My name is Steve Horman, with Director of Planning with Edward Rose, offices in Carmel, Indiana. Edward Rose Millennial Development is applicant. We're also owner, developer, general contractor, and will be the long-term property manager for Upperview Flats Apartments. Edward Rose is more than 100 years old, and it's our intent to hold the property for the long term. That's our business model. We last sold a property in the 1980s and make decisions looking forward, looking ahead for decades. We feel we put together a comprehensive signage plan that will stand the test of time. A plan that provides clear communication and wayfinding, conveys the character and quality of Upperview Flats and the surrounding Hilliard community. The staff report is very informative. We can touch on some things that maybe there were questions about. Appreciate the feedback from staff and the work they put into it. The pipeline easement is the unique factor here, just the width of that easement being 50 feet wide, separate from the right-of-way, so the signs are set back from Riggins Road itself by about 70 feet. As far as some of the questions, there were questions about illumination, the purpose of the Instagram moment sign. We can talk about that a little bit. First of all, illumination. The monument signs will be externally illuminated. The clubhouse entrance wall sign will be non-illuminated. And the Instagram moment sign will be non-illuminated. So those were conditions in the staff report. The Instagram moment sign, if you'd like to know more about that, the idea there in the age of social media, we included in the sign package. It could be considered furniture, a site furnishing, or a landscape feature, almost as much as a sign. But the idea there is that a new resident, after signing their lease, they want to get a photograph that they put on Instagram right away to celebrate that they are new residents. So an individual or a group could interact with that sign, sit on it as a bench, stand behind it, you know, even lay down on it with their elbow propped up. So that's kind of the idea there, you know, just an interactive element within the landscape. We agree and acknowledge the conditions as outlined in the staff report. We respectfully request approval of the proposed comprehensive signage plan, and I'm happy to answer any questions or to provide any other information you might have, you might need.
Tracy, you got any landscape questions? I'm assuming.
Happy with the landscaping, I'm happy with the landscaping.
Okay.
I'm now concerned about the landscaping. So, because I'm thinking if there is landscaping, it might be covering up the bottom of the sign, but also if the address is being put on the west one and the east one, will it cover up the address? Is that a problem for the fire department?
The proposed landscaping is essentially ground cover right in that area of the sign.
Okay, so it's not covering the sign at all?
Correct. And the lighting will be able to illuminate that part of the sign as well.
Thank you. Any other questions for the applicant? You've already answered my questions.
All right.
So, anything, staff got any questions?
No, we just, because that easement that's there and these signs are going to sit so far off the road, we're comfortable with the proposal. It's unusual. Can't remember any other place that has this same situation. I think they're classy looking, and it'll, sitting that far off the road, it'll be a good scale for the rest of the development.
When do you plan on finishing construction and start leasing?
Well, we started leasing already. There are occupants in the first building and soon to be more buildings leased up. What we've got under construction now, the aerial view that was up was pretty recent. So that's really what we're calling phase one, although we're getting now ready to submit for building permits for the entirety of the property. So we're probably 18 months before finishing everything and completion.
Very good. Thank you. Appreciate you coming here tonight.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Is there anyone in the audience that would like to speak for or against this case this evening? Okay. Hearing none, I'd look for a motion.
Mr. Chairman? I'd like to turn on my microphone. I'd like to make a motion in case number 2, PZ 23-5, Upper View Flats Apartments at 5408 Viewpoint Drive, for the approval of a comprehensive signage plan consisting of primary identification signs, ground signs, vehicular directional, and additional site amenity signage. With the following 4 conditions: 1, that the clubhouse address is added so that the East Monument sign, and that all buildings meet identification requirements for the Norwich Township Fire Department. 2, that the east and west monument signs, as well as the clubhouse entrance wall sign, be either non-illuminated or illuminated consistent with the code, Chapter 1129, and the Britain Central PUD text. 3, that the ground sign labeled Instagram Moment be non-illuminated. And 4, that sign permits are obtained for all signs prior to installation.
Motion, do we have a second?
I'll second, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. We have a second. Roll, please.
Chairman Muther,
Yes.
Vice Chair Schneck,
Yes.
Mr. Gutnick, Mr. Louie,
Yes.
Ms. Nixon,
Yes.
Mr. Panic,
Yes.
and Mr. Utley.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
7-0.
All right. Moving on to case 3, PZ-23-4, Hilliard Comprehensive Plan, for review and recommendation to City Council for approval of the Hilliard Comprehensive Plan under the provisions of Article 9.02 of the City of Hilliard Charter. All right. Good evening.
First, I want to sort of recognize a couple of people more than a couple people actually, who have been intimately involved in this process. This is the culmination, this meeting, along with a meeting with City Council on the 27th of this month and possibly into April, depending on those discussions, that has taken almost a year and a half. We not only have had a steering committee composed of 27 different community members who have guided this process, but John and Carson and I have also been intimately involved in all of these details. And so I want to recognize the work that everybody, both on the steering committee and staff members that are here with us this evening, that have put forward for this plan. One of the things I just wanted to mention briefly, we've talked about this process and really called it Hilliard by Design. And that is to very intentionally tell people that this is something that is intentional. We are planning this process. That the community that we want and hope for happens through good planning. And we need to have a good planning document in place, and ultimately a zoning code that follows that, in order to see things happen in our community that we want to have happen. It just doesn't happen kind of coming out of the air. It's something that we have to do intentionally. Very briefly, I think this may be a little bit second nature to some of you. We sometimes have called this a community plan, and other times we've called it a comprehensive plan update. The last time that this was done in 2011, so it's been more than 10 years now, and it has, I think, been called both ways, the comprehensive plan update in 2011. It really is the document that all of us in this room will look at to help guide decision-making when you get the next development proposal through. And one of the questions we will all ask is, does this fit with our community plan? And so what we've tried to do within this document is to give guidelines, and particularly more specific guidelines within a couple of key focus areas that I'll talk about here in a moment. But ultimately, this for John Carson and myself is going to help inform zoning code changes that'll come back to this body and that you'll see probably starting toward the end of this year or early next year that will parallel each of the 5 focus areas. As I mentioned, this has been a little bit of a marathon. We're now about a year and a half into this process. When we started, we were all wearing masks and very nervous about gathering as a group. In fact, some of those early meetings were done in kind of a hybrid fashion, where we had participants joining us remotely. Very challenging in a large environment like this. But where we are now is toward this far right corner. Oh, I apologize. Into March, and as I mentioned, we are going to be before City Council on the 27th of this month. And they will also be taking your recommendations, hopefully your endorsement, but your recommendations forward in considering whether or not to adopt a resolution adopting this plan. So some of you may have participated in this process way back toward the early part of last year. In the public input process that took place at Crooked Can, there were some themes that came out of this, and you can see some of those on your screen right now. But I just wanted to highlight a couple of them because they are things that probably are on your mind as well. Improved community character and appearance. Having unique spaces within a community is something that we heard was an important aspect. Having better development and redevelopment projects come forward. Things that are near and dear to all of us here in this room. And other things that are probably also commonplace in terms of how we identify ourselves and what we're proud of about Hilliard. That having even more pedestrian and bicycle amenities in the community is really important. And it's sort of interesting, as we did the lead up for the community center, we did a public survey. And what do you like most about Hilliard Parks? Well, 1 and 2 were trails. People call it different things, and trails are consistently something that people want more of and that they enjoy a lot in our community. Some of the other takeaways that were part of this public input process were that Hilliard is a good place to live and work, certainly to send children to school. But we also have a relatively weak sense of identity in terms of our physical spaces, as I mentioned a moment ago. Additionally, there are some challenges in terms of housing for our workforce and amenities, and that's sometimes manifests itself in discussions of we want better restaurants in the community. We heard that loud and clear from some of the committee members. And then more walkable spaces that are better connected to those amenities. It is no longer the case that people are looking for an isolated subdivision for the most part, or I should say many people are not looking for an isolated subdivision, but rather there's a growing population of people that want to live in areas that are walkable to amenities like restaurants. And you're seeing that obviously in different parts of Central Ohio. You're seeing that in the interest of from some people living in Old Hilliard. And I think it's a major part of the True Point development that you just heard recently as well. And there were some big ideas that came out of this. And I think this is a pretty powerful list of 8 items. It's not often that we have the opportunity to step back and think big picture about what we want our community to look like in 10 or 20 or 30 or 50 years. And so I just wanted to highlight a couple of these for you because I think they're pretty powerful. They are long-term goals and they could be transformative, each one of them on their own. Focusing growth inward. That is a powerful concept. It is suggesting that we no longer want to grow the community westward. We're close to our water and sewer boundary with Columbus. It would be very difficult to extend that. But one of the things that's coming out of this plan is that we should be focused more on redevelopment of some of our spaces within the community rather than continuing to expand into farm fields or green fields. That is a big switch, obviously, for all of you that have been here over the recent decades where Hilliard has seen so much growth. That growth may still continue, but it's going to happen if we implement this plan in a very different way, where we see it happening in corridors or near I-270 with infill or redevelopment happening. Perhaps in combination with some additional growth in green fields, but additional redevelopment happening. And then reimagining Cemetery Road. I'll touch on this in a moment. It's one of the 5 focus areas. But Cemetery Road really is our front door, and this was another theme that we heard loud and clear, that this needs to look better than it does. And that probably is going to necessitate some redevelopment within that corridor in addition to some other things. Encouraging mixed-use development around premium office sites. I probably don't need to tell any of you that the Verizon building is largely empty. It has a sea of parking around it. And those types of office buildings in our current marketplace are very difficult to fill. That suburban office building that is sort of an island unto itself, without the ability for people to walk to restaurants, without the ability for them to live nearby, is candidly much more difficult to backfill with a new tenant than spaces where you see in Grandview Crossings or Bridge Park, where those companies are able to locate in a place that is seen as cool. It allows them to attract employees. They're able to go out to lunch and back to their offices 1 story up. That is, again, sort of in keeping with what True Point is aimed at, but we're suggesting that we need to make zoning code changes that are consistent with that, perhaps for other office sites along I-270. And then conserving a green belt, and I'll talk a little bit more about this with the Darby area, but the idea of this is that if we are not going to continue growing west, that we need to think about ways that we can leverage the open space that's required in the Darby area. All development that's occurred out there to date had to have 50% open space. Is there a way to weave that together? Probably through trails in a way that we are able to make a green belt around Hilliard, a green belt that ultimately could connect out to the Darby region and really connect us in a better way to those metro parks out there. Pretty powerful concept, one that might take decades to achieve, but a big idea that came out of this. And then I think one of you had asked, what is a little bit different about this plan? And perhaps not unique, but part of the plan that I really appreciated, and I think that is different than perhaps the analysis that was done in 2011, is there was a fiscal analysis of different land uses within the community that was done through a sampling technique. They were able to estimate the financial impacts of different land uses within the community. And my hope is that we're able to incorporate that into the development process moving forward, either through our zoning code or through how we evaluate these proposals, or both. And while it is second nature to some of us, I think it is typically eye-opening to many people that start to understand the municipal financing system in Ohio, that residential, by and large, for municipalities, is a financial drain. That particularly single-family residential in communities like ours is a financial drain, particularly once you calculate in the long-term capital expenses of maintaining that infrastructure. And the reason I mention that is Hilliard is starting to have subdivisions that are now older than 40 years. And you can start to see the infrastructure needs within those subdivisions in a pretty significant way. We're hoping this year that we will take on sidewalk replacement within the Avery neighborhood. But that's a good example of an area that was built, I think, around late 1950s, 1960. Some sections might be older than that. And there are real infrastructure needs. Those things are expensive for cities to maintain. And by and large, because we collect income tax where people work, not where they live, changing a little bit with work from home, though we don't yet have the data to be able to really analyze that. Those subdivisions that are going to require capital maintenance needs are expensive for us to do and to maintain. So this chart is showing even when you introduce some commercial uses in a mixed use kind of building, you start to level out that financial playing field. That if you have one floor of commercial, as you see in the bottom left-hand corner of that chart, you can start to, through neighborhood center, they're calling it a neighborhood center, a little bit of commercial, you can start to balance the financial transaction if there's residential nearby. And the same principle holds, but it gets even better if you're able to have first floor commercial and a second floor of office, and then residential above that. And so there is a theme coming out of this, that as we look toward redevelopment, one of the things we need to be thinking about are ways that that redevelopment can happen to support the city's long-term financial needs, and obviously improve walkability, quality of life, and broaden the range of housing that's available within the community as well. There were 5 focus areas that were taken on as part of this plan, and I just want to briefly mention these. They're all familiar to you, but they are going to inform code changes for each of these 5 areas that will ultimately come before you for consideration. And I'm going to go through each of these in a little bit more detail. I think it's fair to say that each one of these areas is going to see additional interest in development or redevelopment. And each one of these areas, if it's done well, will have a broader impact on the community and the region than just the project itself or the development itself. That there are bigger ideas at play for each of these areas that could really be impactful in terms of how Hilliard looks 10, 20, 50 years from now. Old Hilliard was the first of these focus areas. No secret that the downtown area is seeing a lot of interest, and there are potential redevelopment projects on the horizon. It's going to be important for us to understand clearly what types of development are going to be acceptable to the community and which ones perhaps are not. And one of the things that we heard and that we're going to have to navigate a little bit with zoning code changes is that there are portions of Old Hilliard or downtown Hilliard where people are a little bit more comfortable with taller structures and portions where they are less comfortable with it. And that is going to be one of the key issues that we have to kind of navigate as we implement zoning code changes. Additionally, as you'll see up there, there is an interest in preserving the Norwich Street area as residential. It's an interesting thing given that Norwich Street is really a mix of individual private homeowners and private businesses occupying some what probably historically were residential structures. And then finally, the fairgrounds. To maximize the use and benefit of the fairgrounds, this was an idea that had a little bit of controversy to it, may generate some additional discussion before City Council. And I would just note that in the document, there was an alternative that was put in there that was designed, and I'm going to get the details of this wrong, but it was, I think, essentially sanctioned by the Fair Board for the potential redevelopment of that site. I think what we can all agree upon is that the fairgrounds being so close to Old Hilliard could be utilized in a way that is a little bit more intense, that is more beneficial to not just the fairgrounds, but to the broader community, both in terms of the types of events that it holds and the frequency of those. Cemetery Road. As I mentioned, this is really the community's front door. There were a lot of comments made about the appearance of the corridor, and those improvements may necessitate a lot of different challenging redevelopment projects. And I'm going to talk a little bit about these in just a second. But as you can see, there are a couple of different areas, different colors that really reflect different types of development that are being proposed that we allow within these areas. A little bit more dense, closer to I-270, and closer to transportation. A little bit less dense as you get into that lighter purple area on the north side of Cemetery Road. And then I'll talk about the gold area as well. The top four photos are sort of examples of this village scale mixed use that might be closer to City Hall where we are now along Cemetery Road. Most of these buildings I think are in the Central Ohio area, may be recognizable to you. They're just examples of what we might be able to model for our community. And then the urban scale mixed use that might be closer to I-270 is represented in the bottom two photos. Show these because sometimes people get a little uncomfortable with the D word, density. In reality, it is these types of developments around Central Ohio that allows communities to get interesting restaurants that occupy the first floor. It allows communities to get or see the benefits of mass transportation. And we think areas like Cemetery Road are ripe for this, that because it's a major arterial, it probably makes the most sense for some of that density to be located along Cemetery Road, because we can really leverage walkability, we can leverage mass transportation, and there's going to be an interest in redeveloping some of those properties as they get older. Carson, I think, deserves as much credit as anyone for this slide in particular. But if you think about the residential area on the south side of Cemetery Road, those lots are about 74 feet wide. And the houses that you see depicted at the top of your screen are actually taken from Grandview Yard, this townhouse style. And what you can see in the middle of the bottom that we show are two structures on that existing 74-foot lot, but with a rear alley. And that rear alley is a really key, important ingredient because it allows us to start to remove driveway cuts and the need for left-hand turns on Cemetery Road into these properties. If they're accessed from the rear, we're able to access from some of the side streets ultimately. And that allows us to do some beautification within Cemetery Road itself. It may not be possible for the community to build a center median the whole way, but you can start to do some things that start to narrow the street, lower the speed, and make it a much more pleasing, walkable environment for residents. And I should say, Cemetery Road has some ingredients of walkability that are pretty powerful. We have 2 grocery stores right within the corridor. That makes it a really attractive place for people to live that may be less interested in owning a car or maybe more interested in walking to some of the things close to where they live, such as the grocery store. And then finally, in the lower right-hand corner is depicted a little bit higher. I think it might be a multi-unit building, but again, on that 74-foot lot, an option that might, for example, work well at the corner where you start to see that rear alley access. It might make sense to have something that includes a little bit of commercial space on those corners. The I-270 area. As I mentioned, the current market for suburban office space is, to put it mildly, soft. And part of what we're going to be looking at coming out of the comprehensive plan update are zoning code changes that would allow a range of uses to occur on some of these office sites, primarily as a means to re-energize or encourage the redevelopment of those office spaces. The office space will continue to be our bread and butter when it comes to income tax generation, but what we're hearing and what we know from some of our neighbors is that having those offices located in an environment that allows the workers to go to lunch in a restaurant that's downstairs from them or across the development from them, or allows them to walk to work from the apartment that is located on the same site is attractive. And so I think we're going to be looking at zoning code changes that would allow a range of uses, but provide or mandate a certain level of office space for these sites. There are a couple of other details to this. The crossing of I-270 was also brought up as a big theme, that people wanted to see better connections for non-motorized mechanisms or bicycles and pedestrians across I-270. And so that was something that you see highlighted here in the plan and that we're working on pretty diligently. The rail corridor that is outside of this building obviously could be a transformative project as not just a linear park, but a linear park that connects some of our older neighborhoods into Old Hilliard in a more direct way. And it could be a catalyst for redevelopment along the corridor. There are some areas depicted here in purple in the number 3, light industrial kinds of buildings that potentially could be redeveloped if we had a linear park in a way that allows them to leverage the park and really kind of front on some of that parkland in a way that could be really attractive. The same is also true for the building that we're in now and some of the land that's around us with our operations, that if we have a long linear park going down that rail corridor, one of the ideas that's coming out of this comprehensive plan update is that perhaps we should relocate City Hall and allow this site to be redeveloped in a way that really is appropriate for the linear park. The Big Darby area. As I mentioned, one of the big ideas was that we should start to look inward in terms of how we grow with redevelopment. And in the Big Darby, right now, 50% open space is required with new development. We've reached the limit of available sewer taps, something that we're talking about with Columbus. But right now, essentially, the development that is underway is the development we're going to have unless that situation changes. But I think there's probably a reality that some additional development is likely to happen. There's always going to be some pressure for that. And so this was a really interesting discussion about what would we like this area to look like if we did see additional development. One of the things was that this greenbelt concept, depicted here with these sort of broad green arrows, but how can we weave together these areas with open space, with trails, in a way that not only allows us to connect back into the center of Hilliard, but allows us to connect out to the Darby area. One of the other ideas that came out of this was that perhaps, again, sort of stemming from the fiscal analysis that was done, perhaps not all of this development needs to be residential in nature moving forward. That there are companies, and we think that there's an opportunity with some of the subcontractors from the Intel project that want to locate in areas that, like the Darby in Hilliard, with significant open space, with significant sensitivity toward the environment, that would be interested in sites like we have available if there was, or if we had the sewer limitation lifted. And that helps to balance some of the demands on our schools. It obviously helps to generate revenue for the city. This was another one of the ideas that came out of the discussion and that you see presented in the comp plan. So what are the next steps? I'm here before you tonight and hopeful that, several of you have offered really nice comments, obviously reviewed this document in detail, hopeful that the Planning Commission would be willing to endorse this and forward comments on to City Council. City Council will be hearing a presentation from Planning Next on the 27th of March, and then ultimately in April at some point we will present them with a resolution to ask them to formally adopt the plan. For us in this room, after that is done, the next step is going to be working on zoning code changes, or for some of us in this room, that will come before you probably in about a year. These would be things that are looking at each of those 5 focus areas and trying to make code changes that are probably foundational to allowing some of that redevelopment to happen. Essentially saying we will permit these additional things to happen on these sites. Oftentimes it takes years and years and years for that kind of redevelopment to occur, but having the right zoning code in place is the first step coming out of this plan update. So I've spoken quite a bit, and I apologize for that, but I certainly want to encourage questions and discussion, and I think John, Carson, and I will all be happy to jump in if there are detailed questions about this plan.
Well, thank you. Appreciate that overview. That was very informative. A lot of us did have questions and ideas that we submitted. I guess I'd open the floor to asking some of those again and seeing if they're being considered.
All right, I guess I'll start off. You're showing this plans for Cemetery Road, and I'm all for more dense development along Cemetery and bringing the development closer to the street, not so far set back. But what happens to the homes on the south side of Cemetery? Are they all gonna like turn the other way, or the park? Are we moving the parking? Like, what is that alleyway? Because there's homes now along the south side of Cemetery. I don't know.
One of the things that's nice about that plan, I'm going to pull that slide up if you don't mind, because I think it's an excellent question, is that oftentimes it's difficult to assemble multiple parcels together to do a large-scale development. And one of the beauties of Carson, again, I want to give him credit for this thinking, was how could, as an individual homeowner, you could stay in your home as long as you want. But if you wanted to, you could also either sell your property or conceivably yourself, you could redevelop that property with 2 individual housing units on it in that rear alley. So essentially the zoning code changed, and I think this is one that will take quite a bit of conversation with people who live along Cemetery Road or abut it. will allow a little bit more intense use and probably a little bit higher financial return than they currently have with a single-family house. Now, your question about the rear alley, that parking would have to happen along the rear alley, and this is depicting garages in the rear. And there's an important detail to this, which is the redevelopment would have to happen closest to the corners first. That having this kind of rear alley concept does not work if it happens in the middle of the block without having redevelopment going out to the corners.
Interesting. And then I also saw in the section you didn't cover is we've got some target areas, target industries for development, and one of them was film and media arts, which kind of surprised me. But there's a lot of stuff going on in Hilliard I don't know about, so.
There was a study done, economic development study that was done last year, looking at how we can move forward and start to target potential businesses within the community. And one of the things that was done by a national firm was to evaluate, using demographic information, what opportunities we might be able to go after that aren't currently really in the area. And the film and television was one of them.
Well, the high school's all set up for that. They've got all kinds of new programs now. I guess that's it for now.
Evan?
I might be a while, so you can go first.
Go ahead, Bill.
All right. Well, first of all, much of what you've discussed tonight, having worked on previous comprehensive plans for the city, looks somewhat familiar, but a lot of it's new. And I appreciate the thoroughness of the plan. A couple of things concern me. Some of the big ideas. And I guess number one is the one that is number one, focusing growth inward. In that we're going to, essentially limit Hilliard to what we're restricted to by the city of Columbus as far as our sewer taps and so forth. Being in the real estate business, I've seen in other communities where they decided to not be aggressive as they could with annexation and so forth, and controlling their borders. And they've come to regret that because development does occur. And as I see development based on what Morpsey is saying and everything, and just, Intel, the whole central Ohio area, and seeing what land prices themselves have done just in the last 5 or 10 years, we can put a fence up around Hilliard and we can just say, well, we're done. But I think we're going to regret that in the long term. It won't be in my lifetime, but I think that it will, it limits your ability to control what's around you. And the other big concern is the development that's going to be occurring. I was involved with the Big Darby Accord back when we were hashing that out with Columbus and the other suburbs. And we came up with something I think has worked pretty well overall. It's created development in Hilliard that we'd never seen before, 50% open space, and looking to have water, storm water that comes out as clean and can go into the Big Darby Creek without pollution. Unfortunately, there are many of our adjoining neighbors to the west that are not part of that. And there is significant development plan for Plain City, Madison County. And again, the cost of farmland and so forth continues to go up. Development is going to occur if we don't make an effort to try and at least, I would say the school district, Hilliard School District would make a natural boundary for us. We don't want to jump Big Darby Creek, but if we don't make an effort of that, it will come and we won't have anything to say about it. And as a city, I just think long-term that's short-sighted. But much of the other plans, as far as reimagining Cemetery Road and redevelopment, I can tell you that the fairgrounds is it's a difficult subject for a lot of different people. So there are those who just want it to stay the way it is and so forth, but I don't think that's realistic. And I think that Hilliard would benefit by honoring the past, but moving forward to something that's, appropriate for the future. So I don't want to take up too much time, but those are just some of the things that stuck out to me. But again, there are many things in this plan I think are well thought out and positive for Hilliard. But I think I think we may be sticking our head in the sand on a couple of issues. Thank you.
Yes, Tom?
Real quick, I see that we're referred to as the Planning Commission. Is there a reason we're not the Planning and Zoning Commission?
I apologize, it's simply a clerical.
Looking at, I read through the document, and I did pick out one item, I don't know if I can find it here shortly or not, but there was I think references to being cognizant or sensitive or looking forward to what the developers are putting in. And, we can, I'm an engineer, civil engineer, sensitive to roadways, roadway design. I would think that as we design our roads, as we design more walkable spaces and everything else, we can also make them a little more resilient. I would wonder if in our code sections or our road design manuals, in some cities, they take a little more aggressive action on that. Could we require developers specifically to build more robust roads, more resilient roads, so that we're not having to come back 40 years later and replace these things? Put that on them, spread it out, the cost a little bit to those who are wanting to build those things in our communities. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
John, I'm talking crazy, but how that would get changed or implemented, I don't know.
I would just note, and Clark could give more detail to this, but we recently just updated our pavement standards.
Yeah.
Because we realized we needed to update some of the materials that were listed there, and we needed to candidly make them more stout, right in line.
We're doing that already. And then I'll have another question, but I'm not sure if I can find it. Oh, page 35, and this will be our last question or point. EV hookup should be required in new single-family homes. It seems like someone's recommendation, or is that what we're going to try to push or try to zone for that? It seems extreme, knowing what I know about electric vehicles.
There are changes being contemplated for the conservation zoning district that would, at least in the draft state, and this ultimately would come before you, require that they be ready to have EV in those structures. So perhaps making sure that the conduit is in place or that some of the wiring is in place without necessarily installing it completely.
So that could be a building code type of?
Right now, it would be part of the zoning code, and it would not be part of the building code.
That's it. Thank you.
Eric, you want to go next? I think Bevan wants to go last, I think. Okay, go.
I noticed the EV thing too, so it was interesting you pointed that out. So generally, I think it's a very comprehensive plan, and I like that it adds context to things going on outside of Hilliard. And I appreciated that, like when we did the feedback process, the public thing, I submitted mine on Talk to Us Hilliard, and I noticed that a lot of those things were incorporated into the plan, so I appreciate that. Now, my long list of edits that I sent the staff, it was mainly like minor things that I consider to be at the staff's discretion as to whether they implement those or not. But I do have some general questions that I just wanted to run through. And you don't have to like give me long answers, but I wanted to get through them. So the first is, did you feel like the public input the city received was good as far as the amount of public input and how many times you did it? And is the public currently commenting on the plan like up until council passes it?
That's correct. So we're using Talk to Us Hilliard to accept public comment even today, up until the time that this comes before council on the 27th. You know, I thought the event at Crooked Can was excellent, and I think the various pop-up events that happened, trying to grab people and get their opinions about things where they were congregating, was really, really well done. And some of you may have volunteered for some of those things or seen those tables on Celebration at the Station or the 4th of July celebration. It is always a little bit more challenging to get people engaged on topics like this that are both long-term and, it says, people are really invested in their kids' schools. Schools have a natural advantage when it comes to feedback. It's a little bit more difficult to get people invested and really engaged in thinking about a topic like this. I think we do a really good job, but inevitably it's a little bit more difficult. You have to spend a lot more energy to get that feedback.
Yeah, I got back on Talk to Us Hilliard to see if I could find the old stuff I posted, but I saw the draft plan there instead, but I hadn't seen it like posted anywhere that it was available for people to look at the full plan.
I think we're starting to do a social media push in the lead up to the council meeting.
Very good. And the Hilliard by Design Committee, was there anything they wanted in the plan that was not able to be incorporated, maybe because of technical reasons or something like that?
I mean, it's a large group, right? So answering that question implies that there was unanimity in all 27 members. There were things that generated a little bit of, well, quite a bit of discussion and controversy. Specific language around the use of economic development financing, for example, generated a discussion that ultimately came before City Council halfway through this process. But I think for the most part, one of the things that's really heartwarming to me and nice about the process is that there is a lot of love for the community, and there's a lot of unanimity about the future of the community and what people see as real strengths and directions that they want us to go in collectively.
So on the future land use and character map, which was on page 21, first of all, I appreciated that there was a little disclaimer there saying that, like you said, people don't like the word density, and that showed like different, I guess, scenarios or whatever you'd like to refer to them as. So I appreciated that it basically said that they would be implemented by the zoning, but also by the different developments coming forward, because I think that could confuse the public. On that map, if we compare that map to the 2011 plan, do you feel like it's a continuation of the 2011 plan, or are there areas that are substantially different? Because I couldn't like go through parcel by parcel and see what was different.
Yeah, and the 2011 plan had a map that showed where there were likely changes to be made from a land use standpoint. This one doesn't necessarily have that. I think in some ways, this plan does carry on some of the elements from the 2011 plan, but it has some significant differences. For example, the Greenbelt idea is different from that.
Is there like a significant difference in more of the core of Hilliard?
I think this plan has more specifics in terms of things in Old Hilliard, like building height. So even though our current zoning permits a 4-story plus building in Old Hilliard, most people don't realize that, but the comprehensive plan doesn't necessarily say that. This one specifies that there are areas where that height could be appropriate in Old Hilliard. And that got some attention during the discussion, even though it's currently allowed. So that idea was lost between the zoning code and the comprehensive plan. But I think it's consistent with the current plan in terms of there should be redevelopment along there. And what the plan looks at is when it all is built down there, when it's done, here's what we would want it to look like. Here are the elements that should be there. And that's not going to happen in the lifetime of this plan. But it's it's a goal so that if somebody has that crazy idea, oh, let's measure it with what that recommendation is. So I think in some ways it's better because it gives more a specific idea on what that development should generally be like in terms of building heights or density and that kind of stuff. But I think it's consistent with that. Yeah, there's room for redevelopment down there, as an example.
Well, you mentioned Old Hilliard, so in the version of the plan I looked at, it was the PDF version, and there were some sticky notes left over from someone, and in one of the action items, it talked about removing references to downtown Hilliard. And I'd heard conversation about Old Hilliard versus downtown Hilliard. So where does that stand? What are we supposed to call it? What's the difference?
Sure, there are areas, obviously we've got signage that reflects Old Hilliard in that central core. We have increasingly seen redevelopment happening on the fringes of what people have referred to as Old Hilliard, landmark lofts. We've seen the Dora expand beyond the boundaries of what I think historically was considered Old Hilliard. And so we've started to call that broader area downtown Hilliard. Still with this historic core to it of Old Hilliard, but it just isn't appropriate, in my opinion, to refer to landmark lofts, which has some of the restaurants that were part of the Dora in it, as Old Hilliard necessarily.
Okay, so the phrase Old Hilliard isn't really going away. Okay. As far as the Cemetery Road path on the south side, I'm wondering what determined having it on the south side versus the north side? Because to me, with the commercial on the north side, I would think it would be easier to implement a path. But I was wondering if that was just based on the public feedback of the pedestrian bridge or how that was decided.
I think the biggest reason is the difficulty with trying to get a path where you have the loop access points to 270, to and from 270. Those are really difficult to get a path through there. So the southern side was a lot easier. You don't have as much conflict point going across it.
Okay, so it wouldn't make
I've ridden a bike across 270 on that north side. It'll get your heart going because it's a little crazy, but
I just didn't, I know in the scenarios when we were choosing like which pedestrian bridge scenario was better, that there were different options, and like one was on the north and one was on the south and one had you cross over. So I didn't know if it, like obviously we decided it would go on the south side, but I didn't know if it would make sense to then cross over because it's easier to put the path all the way down Cemetery Road.
yeah, I think the path that's shown in there was the one when you looked at all of the options and impacts, made more sense to do that, a safer, easier and affordable path all the way around. But yeah, I mean, it looked at all the different options.
Can I interrupt real quick? Like, something just went off there.
Yeah, go ahead.
Was ODOT involved with this? I mean, is there a day that those loop ramps are gonna go away and we'll have a diverging diamond there or something like that? I mean, was ODOT considered as part of this? I mean, maybe that interchange will look different in 10 years.
I know that they were considered. They were part of the discussion. It was part of why we chose the firm to assist us because they had experience with ODOT that we knew would be helpful in this process. But it does not currently have any plans to redo that interchange. As much as we might like that to happen, I suppose, we're living with the interchange as it currently exists. And so I think, if I remember the details correctly, part of what's being potentially planned is essentially a tunnel under one of those entrance ramps that takes you onto the southbound I-270, and then a separate bridge. Similar to what you might see up at Bethel Road and 315, if any of you have driven through there. A little bit different configuration, but there's a tunnel that goes underneath the entrance ramp there.
Sorry, Devin.
It's all good. As far as implementation, I know, like, I believe when people submit an application to the planning department, it asks the question, how does this align with the comprehensive plan? Is that correct? And is that serving you well? Like, are they all going in and like reviewing the whole plan, or do they just like skim through it and they're like, oh, walkable community?
No, they usually tell us what they want to do, and then we pull the plan out and say, no, this is what the plan says. So there's a range. Some have looked at it and go, oh yeah, this is what we want to do. Because they know that if they go in consistent with the plan, it's a lot easier. And so we have some that actually do that. Hey, I've looked at your plan. It says we can do this. Here's what we want to do, and what do you think? And how do we get that through? But sometimes, I mean, today had no bearing on the plan. Like, there's no way that that's going to be reviewed positively.
But generally, the process is working the way.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah, I like the implementation section, and this will be really helpful. That's what we refer to a lot with a review of an application.
When it is finalized, will there be more than just a PDF for people to look at?
Will be. I saw your question in your email. Thank you.
Yes.
There's going to be an Esri story map. I don't know if you've used those before,
used
but
those.
I'm sure that we'll have also obviously the document itself, but that story map functionality will be built into the final product.
Excellent. And then my final question is, can you explain this fees in lieu of work concept? I've never heard of that. The plan makes reference to fees in lieu of work, and it looks like no one knows what this is.
Did you see that in the Old Hilliard section?
Let me do a search. This one I see is on page 53, which I'm trying to see what section it is. It's in the economic development section. I can try to see.
Oh, yeah, page 53.
It says, establish dedicated funds to manage fees in lieu. There are several opportunities to use fees in lieu for specific objectives, including creating trail-oriented development, obtaining land for the Darby area greenbelt, or setting aside land for a multi-use path along Cemetery Road. For each purpose where it is used, the city should monitor associated fee in lieu criteria and formulas to ensure the effectiveness of this program.
Yeah, so the general concept, and I'll give you a couple of different potential applications for it, is that we may have a concept for how we want an area to redevelop, but it may not make sense, and I'll use Cemetery Road as a good example. We know we would like a multi-use trail down Cemetery Road. If only one parcel develops, it may not make sense for them to put in a 10-foot wide multi-use trail on their 74 feet of frontage. It may make more sense for us to collect a fee that we can then use to construct that trail when we get more properties assembled. Same thing might be true in Old Hilliard, where we may want streetscape improvements, particularly on uncurbed streets, to occur over the long term. In some communities, and we could implement the same sort of concept, have accepted fees in lieu of for development on that site, knowing that it's very, very hard to tie together sidewalks on an uncurbed street at certain times until the street itself is improved, and that needs to happen on a little bit longer stretch than one parcel.
That makes sense. Thank you.
So we do have one in the code that currently, the fee in lieu of land dedication for parks. And so if there's the opportunity that if we don't like the land that's being proposed for a park, we could require the fee in lieu of that so that parkland or park improvements could be purchased that the developer provides instead of having to take some land that's not suitable for what we're talking about. But they're just looking at that framework and maybe applying it to other things. For example, parking in Old Hilliard. If somebody doesn't provide parking spaces, is it possible to provide a fee in lieu of providing parking so that those monies could go towards establishing a more central located parking area? So that's an idea too, but there could be applied to a number of things.
Makes sense. That's all I have. Thank you.
Chris?
Well, let me say, I went through your entire 150 pages, not once but twice, and you can see all my comments. I will try my best to boil this down. Trying to make some brevity out of this has always been my difficult part. I had 7 pages of notes. 6 pages became an actual letter to staff. I was surprised staff included in the report tonight. I thought it was just a letter to staff saying, these are my comments, but I'm glad that they're in there. The most important comments are in bold. And 3 or 4 of those are the ones you've already mentioned tonight, that including the concentration of mixed uses and commercial, reflections on long-term cost, village and urban. Mixed use was important. I thought the first one actually was kind of grossly overlooked on pages 8 and 9. That is, we'll be approximately, according to your calculations, and the consultant, 50,000 people by 2050. I think if that number is circled and reversed backwards, I think we should manage on that. Not as a goal, but it's something that will probably happen, and maybe the plan could have been tweaked for that. But that's just a general comment. There was also policy issues. As Bill Utley said, there's long-range planning issues which may not have been addressed. One issue which I thought of was the reactivation of Old Hilliard Commission. Now, they don't have to be an approval authority, but they were a commission until 2005, and then just, we want to say that, no longer a commission. And I think they should be reactivated, because if we're going to make Old Hilliard our placemaking, they should have a say in this, and they should have a commission. Part 2 of that is there also should be an architectural review commission included to look at both historically important buildings and structures, and look at some of the things that we're proposing that are modern, but they should look at from a standpoint, does this fit in Hilliard? These are policy issues which, you know, being on the board for 20 years, we seem to see long-term planning. This is my 3rd comp plan for the city, probably my 6th overall in 30 years that I've been doing this. I was hoping to see a little bit more of those issues at least brought up. They may not have made the final edition, but I would recommend, if you could, or any of the board members and staff, read the entire 6 pages. The one that was not put in bold, again, was on the comprehensive plan. I do really love your re-imaging the gateway. That's a great big idea. There's a couple more involving the county fairgrounds, which I'm on the other side. I'm on this side of the fence, and I think we should just redevelop it. That's just where I've been standing on that for 20 years. Relocating City Hall, maybe, to that same location that I just mentioned. And there was a couple more in here. I really can't think it off the top of my head. But I thought overall, if I were to boil this down to just a few comments, I really liked your comprehensive plan, whether you want to call it Hilliard by Design, community plan, whichever the 21st century version of that will be. I liked it. There was just some long-range planning issues I thought that maybe could have been addressed. Sewer and water contract, I think, with the city of Columbus expires in 2050 or 55. That's the 100-year contract. I really am surprised that was not addressed. I even recommended a water authority for Western Franklin County, including Grove City, Hilliard, and Dublin, which could occur, but those type of issues were kind of put off because 2050 sounds like it's 1,000 years, and it's really not. Basically, if we're looking at this, the mixed uses I really like too. Matter of fact, I really love the mixed uses. So if these have to involve code changes for 2024, I'm sure staff and a lot of members in P&Z like to be involved in that. But overall, again, I'll try to use some brevity here. I like your focus. You contacted the community. You did this entirely during a pandemic. You got a lot of great ideas on here. The only thing I was looking for was long-range planning issues and policy that could have been brought up. The one in here involving Alton Darby Road possibly being an exit off of 70 would be a huge impact on Hilliard if that happens. But I think that's some of the pitfalls Mr. Utley and I have being here so long that we see different things that occur. He brought up Madison County, the floodplain, and Big Darby Court. I brought more of the bricks and mortars and roads back into that. But again, I'll flip it back to the chairman. If we look at the 50,000 number, that's a big number. And when I came here, Mr. Utley same way, it was 5 or 10,000. Now it's 32, 33,000, 50,000. It's just around the corner, so to speak. The mixed uses, I think, would be the best future use to install and maybe trim back on the single-family subdivisions. And both those were exactly what you had focused on, and I appreciate that. It's just a number of economics, what pays for what, and a price tag. That's all I had. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you for your thoughtful comments. If I can just add one perhaps detail to this, because housing and how we handle the growth that we're seeing in our region and in our community is a hot topic.
Yeah.
We have more than 2,000 housing units that have either been approved and are under construction, or that have been approved and are going to be under construction in our community right now. The BIA study that many are citing in terms of deficiency and available housing units in the region, which looks to be true based on the growth that we're seeing in Central Ohio. If Hilliard was to proportionally address that housing need, we would need to have between 2,300 and 3,200 housing units by 2032. We're almost there today. That growth is going to continue, there's no doubt about that. But I think it's also important to remember how much is going on right now that isn't even factored into the nearly 38,000 residents in our community.
That's all I had.
Thank you. Eric?
Great plan, nice presentation. Appreciate your time to present that to us. My major concerns, I wrote a list of little bullet points and caveats of random thoughts. You probably have that. I'm not going to go into detail on those. I am concerned about the sewer boundary and the water issues of how we plan to develop when that's already seems to be a constraint. And do we have options A, B, and C? Or are we just tied with the city of Columbus? Or do we have other plans in the works to help alleviate that constraint? And I didn't see anything in the plan specifically, other than it says, yeah, we got a problem. That's what I see, and I don't see us addressing how we resolve that problem.
So I can answer that briefly if you don't mind. There is, as many of you know, this 2,000 limit that came out of the Darby Accord. We, within the last 18 months, initiated a study to look at sewer capacity within the Darby area. That study essentially showed that there is additional capacity. And so we've been engaging Columbus in those discussions about what that might look like and exactly what quantity that might be. But be careful what you wish for, because as soon as that number increases, we need to have a pretty good plan in place for what we want that development to look like. And
I didn't know it was specific to that, the Darby Accord area only. When I was reading that back in my head, I was thinking we had a constraint with Hilliard in general.
no, it's just the Darby area. There is a boundary that roughly frames our western boundary in the Darby area for the water and sewer contract boundary that Mr. Louis was referencing. That boundary would have to be renegotiated if we wanted to extend water and sewer out to the west of that.
That was the only major issue as far as, from my perspective, that needed a little more addressing. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have another question now.
All right.
So when we talk about the Big Darby Accord, I always struggle in my mind with how to approach things, because it seems like it's not binding, and then other communities are doing various things that make people mad, and so like, when one of those communities does something, should I be mad at them, or should I just worry about Hilliard? Are the people talking like, what's round 2 of the Big Darby Accord, or what's the answer?
I feel like you should be laying on a couch somewhere.
I think so too.
You know, John, you've been as involved as anyone with that process. I don't know if you want to try and answer that, or.
Well, I mean, I think a lot of good things have come out of just having the accord in place. It made us and other cities look at development differently and finding different ways to do things, which was a plus. The difficult part of that, when you look at only 15% of the whole watershed has this accord on it. So what's the other 85% doing? And why aren't the state agencies and federal agencies involved in this? Because it's a state and national scenic river system. So where are those? So that's my frustration, is it seems like it's on our responsibility in this little small part of the overall watershed, and nobody else who's outside of that has any real plan that addresses those same issues. So I don't know, the plan hasn't been updated, that was the intention, but it's such a difficult process that it's probably not gonna get updated as an overall plan, but I think we started looking at just our own portion and maybe having the land use issues, the stream restoration areas, at least updated, that we can present back to them and maybe at least update our portion of it. And if others do that, it'll just give a better idea of where we stand. But until this is a holistic thing in the watershed, I think there is gonna be frustration, as you mentioned.
So a follow-up question, because I'm by no means a scientist. Is the stuff we're doing helping the watershed where we are, or is it basically making it cleaner for people down the river, and we're getting the pollution and stuff from people north or south of us, whichever way it flows?
I don't know exactly, but I think, the Clovergroff and Hamilton Run areas were among the poorest in quality of that system. And so, but I have to think that the way development has occurred in these areas, because we've done a considerable amount of stream restoration in these areas, it's gonna have to have a positive effect, or at least a better effect than not doing them. The difficult part about that is it takes sometimes a lot of years for those to be realized. You don't just do the stream restoration and we do a couple of nice developments and then, all of a sudden now the water quality is great and the total suspended solids, the nitrogen and phosphorus levels are all, where they should be. It takes a long time sometimes for those to be realized, especially when there might be other areas that aren't appreciating those principles that are in the Darby area.
Thank you.
I'm the only ones left, aren't I?
Got all the answers now.
All right, very good. I think the plan is very good. I like the plan in general. Could you go back to your top initiatives, that slide there? Because Bill brought up something that I believe is very important, but I don't know that we can't do both. It says focus on growth inward. I think there's so many opportunities, and you've shown a lot of them for us to do that within the area we've got. I think that should be a focus. But I also am concerned, I don't want us to put a fence around ourselves that we would possibly regret later. So I think that's my biggest takeaway. But the first initiative, I think, is good. I think we should focus inward and look at what we got that we could redevelop. So, with that, anybody else got any follow-up? I think technically I'm probably supposed to ask if there's anybody in the audience who would like to speak for or against, but Greg left the meeting, so there's nobody.
We got someone behind
There is
him.
someone there. Nope. Thank you for coming. I couldn't see you back there. Okay, with that,
I was going to ask if he could bring the turkeys back. Sorry, I just had to do that. All three of them. I'm sorry, Chairman.
if there's no other questions, I would look for a motion.
Mr. Chair? I move to approve Case 3, PZ-23-4, the Hilliard Comprehensive Plan for recommendation to City Council under the provisions of Article 9.02 of the City of Hilliard Charter.
I will second.
Thank you. Roll, please.
Chairman Muther,
Yes.
Vice Chair Schneck,
Yes.
Mr. Gutnick,
Yes.
Mr. Louis, I apologize.
Yes.
Ms. Nixon,
Yes.
Mr. Panet,
Yes?
and Mr. Utley.
Yes.
Thank you all. Do we have any discussion items?
You want to know about the turkey?
Yeah, I do.
Public Arts Commission meeting on Monday, we were talking turkey. We have put out a call for artists. There was we were going to look, there was a number of people in the community who would like to, because they were such a high-profile feature, or part of our Hilliard fabric here for the last couple of years. And they generated a wide spectrum of pros and cons from the public. But generally speaking, most people thought it was kind of cool. So we're putting out a call for artists to see if we can commemorate the turkeys. Okay, and do something, as Councilman Omar Tarazi was saying, he wants to see something fun. Not just a sculpture or whatever, but, well, that's what, we're going to see what the artists come back with. We're not going to give any preconceived ideas out there, and we'll see. Unfortunately, the update is one turkey was injured before the other two were removed. The one that was injured, I don't know the status of it. I assume it's still doing all right. The other two got relocated to Blendon Woods, and as ODNR was afraid of, they tried to walk back to Hilliard, or they left their enclosure. One of them was out on 160, one of them was hit. We don't know that, I don't know for a fact, but we're not sure that it's still with us. And then one of the other members of the commission did a little research, and it turns out that the average life of these large turkeys is 3 to 5 years. So it's a wild animal and it doesn't last that long. But so yeah, it's not likely they're coming back, Mr. Louie. But it was fun while they were here for some people, and other people were glad they're gone.
Thank you.
That's my update.
All right, thank you. I don't have anything. Chairman's communication. Tracy, do we have any committee communication?
Where's that? Help me, help us out. Fill in the blanks. Okay. Turkey Park.
Well, if no one has anything else, I would make a motion to adjourn. All in favor, say aye.
Second motion.
Thank you.
Aye. All right. Are you serious, Bill? That was thank you. You're gonna do a mural with the turkeys on it? Proposing? Okay, what was your proposing?